My name is Sally Wantz, and I welcome you to our Florence Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. As we have done for so many years, we begin today's service with singing. And I'm going to invite my friends Catherine, Darlene, and Ruth to join me up here. Our small group has gathered today, and Jeff Lovejoy is on piano, and he's going to lead us with our music as we sing number 123, Spirit of Life. Thank you, Jeff. Glad you could be with us today. So a brief announcement. The board will be meeting this Tuesday, the 24th at 3 p.m. here at the Fellowship, practicing social distancing. And we're going to be talking about the ways that we can continue to remain connected and where we're going to be going in the next few weeks. So please stay tuned for some information from the board. However, if you want to share your thoughts, your concerns, your ideas, please send an email to florence.unitarian@gmail.com. Let us know what's on your mind, okay? As well, Reverend Ruth has shared with me that the Pastoral Care Committee is meeting regularly and is available if you need any support. You or someone you know needs support. All you have to do is send an email to pastor.fuuf@gmail.com or call us on our phone. We're at 541-997-2840. I understand that we will be having some representatives from the Pastoral Care Committee doing some phone monitoring, shall we say. They're going to be here on site a couple of hours a day for the next few weeks. We don't have many more details than that, so when the e-blast comes out on Wednesday, you'll know some more of those details. And if this is something you'd like to help do, monitor the phones for us, again, let us know that as well. So, any other announcements? Did I miss Ruth? Darlene? Catherine? Okay. So our words of welcome come from Amanda Schuber and is titled Words of Welcome for a Difficult Time. Whether you're watching because worshiping with us is a part of your routine, or whether you feel like our country has been stopped in its tracks and it's impossible to return to normalcy, on this morning, we gather to proclaim that we belong to one another and that others belong to us. Broken hearts are welcome here. Anxious spirits are welcome here. Minds whirring faster than a racing engine, uncertain what to think. Stubborn egos that sometimes trip us up, cementing us to opinions. Fragile, shell-shocked souls. Say it with me, everybody here, and if you're watching with us, you are welcome here. Yours, mine, and everyone else's. Not because this community will fix it through easy solutions or the right way forward. No, as a liberal religious congregation, we have something far more fragile and far more powerful than that. Our need to be together. Our need to reconnect to the life-giving source that moves within and among us. And our need to make one another a little bit braver and wiser before returning to the service of life. Blessed be. I invite, who would like to come help me light the chalice? Thank you, Darlene. Light our chalice with words written by Cynthia Landrum. This is titled Superheroes, and it's dedicated to all who are listening right now. Mindful, yeah, you gotta click it. It takes 2 fingers. Go. Got it? Okay, try it one more time. Or we can do matches.
There we go.
Yes! Mindful that with great power comes great responsibility. We light this chalice in the hope that in brightest day, in blackest night, our faith will flame on. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
And Darlene is going to share with us her joys and concerns, so I invite her back up.
Turn around. Good morning, everyone. In our community, we make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person in this community has value. Each person's experience matters. We share our sorrows with one another today, knowing that sorrow comes into each person's life, and together we offer comfort. We also share our joys with one another, knowing too that joy comes into all our lives, knowing that together our voices can rise in a chorus of celebration. We make space each week for joys and concerns, knowing the life and experience of every person matters, and together our ripples in the water send energy outward and inward as needed. For those here today, if you wish to come forward, please drop a shell in the water and briefly share what is in your heart or on your mind. If you want us to share your joy or concern next week, send us an email and we'll read it aloud on your behalf. Send it to florence.unitarian@gmail.com.
So I want to like to share a concern. One is, our light went out. I know we always struggle with getting this guy set and lit and staying lit. So let's see if we can get it going again. If not, we'll get another candle. We're going to get another candle in a minute. So my joy is being here with you today. The things that I'm doing at my own home are keeping me safe and sound with Jennifer. And I know she'd like to be here today as well, but she's a little more cautious than I am. So I wish her well. And anybody else want to share?
I also have a joy for this incredibly loving community. How some of us struggled initially to really understand that this was all happening. And now we are together. We are pulling together, making sure each other has enough supplies, making trips to town if necessary for others. That's my joy. It's a wonderful place to live.
So I'd ask Ruth to drop a final shell for those unspoken joys and concerns that rest deep within us. Blessed be.
Blessed be. Thank you. So producing this live for all of you is an interesting situation we're in, but we're having some fun doing it for you, so hope you enjoy. Catherine's got a responsive reading for us, and those that are here today we will join in, if that's okay, with the reading, and you all at home can just enjoy what we have.
Our reading for today is number 498 by Howard Thurman. And he was an African-American theologian and civil rights leader. He played a leading role in many social justice issues in the 20th century. So there's 4 paragraphs. I'll do the first, and you can respond with the second. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by all-pervading presence of the holy, my heart whispers,
Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in good times or in tempests,
I may not forget that to which my life is committed.
Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve.
And so it is.
And so it is. So at this time, Jeff's with us this week and has selected something to play. We're going to go into a quiet moment where you at home can just sit back, close your eyes, and enjoy this beautiful music from Jeff Lovejoy. Jeff, what will we be playing today?
Looking forward.
Looking Forward.
I think it explains itself.
Awesome, awesome.
Lovely, thank you.
It's always such a trip. Be up here and be able to see everyone, even if I'm only seeing them in my mind right now. Those of you who are here are just a delight. So I'm doing something with the computer this morning and some slides. It's something I put together before all of this began to fall apart. This world that we're living in went and ground itself to a halt. Who knew it was possible to slow down the machine that has been our culture and to have people get off the wheel so thoroughly? My goodness, it is pretty amazing. So as a futurist, I am fascinated with the possibilities, and the scientist in me is intrigued with the numbers and the biology of what is happening. And the parent in me is doing all the things parents do. And we're just going to have to see how it unfolds, because literally nothing like this has ever happened before in all of humanity's history. We've never had the global data instantaneously like this before. We've never had communication be so clear and available on so many levels in so many ways. We've never had so many rumors floating around the whole planet. And we've never been able to have something spread, biological spread, as quickly as it is spreading right now. On top of that, we have a cultural time, a time in certainly American culture, and it seems to me to be true in many other cultures around the planet right now, where we are not remembering our history very well, and we are choosing to focus on very specific things. So what's happened is something that to some extent has been predicted, and to a large extent was impossible to predict, because this combination of ingredients was not foreseeable. And we're going to see what that looks like. Now, the talk that I prepared for today is about where we may be going for the long haul. And it's something that fascinates me, and I hope you will find interesting too. So we're going to look at the first slide here. In the first slide, some of you may remember, this is the output from a computer program that was developed back in the 70s. The book was called The Limits to Growth. This one is from Beyond the Limits. And this came out in the 90s with new data. This is a program that I got to play with in graduate school, and I pushed all the variables, we all did, to see how far we could push that sudden collapse. How many years out could we push it? Now there's a vertical line up the middle of this graph, and that's the year 2000. And as you can see, we were well into the dynamics of this. And the dynamics that are pushing it are the resources falling. As the resources fall, then everything else begins to happen. This was for the US economy and culture back in the 70s and 90s. And however, I have this little broad point of view, this broader perspective, and I began to look at it, and I realized it applies to every single empire that has ever existed, from Sumer all the way through Egypt, China, the Incas, even the Mayans, everywhere around the world. This pattern happens because the empire culture exploits resources, it doesn't sustain them. And so when it's about accumulating resources and exploiting them rather than sustaining them for the long term, you're going to get this dynamic. So the Gobi Desert, a few thousand years ago, was the Gobi Forest. The cedars of Lebanon from the Bible no longer exist, and so on and so forth. Greece was once looked like Oregon. All right, and those who have been to Greece recognize it doesn't come close to Western Oregon anymore. It looks more like Eastern Oregon, actually. So what we're dealing with here is resources that are being used. There's been an increase in population, an increase in services, an increase in production, an increase in all these wonderful things. Nobody sees it coming. And then there is the peaking and the falling away. Now, why does it peak and fall away? All living systems, whether it's a plant or an animal or a culture, are going to have this kind of pattern. This pattern of exponential growth that looks really slow initially, and we've all been seeing this graph a lot lately. This is not a virus life, this is human life that's being shown, okay? Biological systems follow this, what's called an S-curve. Exponential growth until they achieve a limit. Normally, a living system then just kind of backs off from the limit a little bit, and then gets up close again, and then backs off again, and so on, in that little wiggly line. But often, in human systems, will go far beyond the carrying capacity, and then they collapse to a much lower level. And that's what we're seeing here. And if we look at that graph again, and we put that carrying capacity line across there, and we add a second line, which would be 2020, you can see that we have exceeded the carrying capacity of our planet, not just our continent, not just our country. And so this pattern is what is falling upon us at this point. And as you can see, that black line is the death rate, and it goes up. It goes up because of reaction to pollutants. It goes up because of inadequate resources. It goes up because of illness. So we are at this point in the global Western economic empire culture all over the planet. And we have every reason to assume that over the next decades, we can see the rest of that playing out. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I spent 40 years of my life to prevent that, and we're still there, and that hurts. So, having gotten there, what is happening? I want us to understand cultures, human cultures. The first one, the one that continues even, the oldest one, at least 250,000 years old, probably 2.5 million, is what we call the tribal culture. It's a hunting-gathering culture. It may or may not be in villages. It's a culture in which people moved from place to place to find the food supply and live on it. A hunting-gathering culture takes about an hour and a half a day, about 6 days a week, to meet everybody's needs. The rest of the time is spent telling stories, making interesting things, whatever. It's fascinating. It's a very simple culture. The needs are simple because you're picking up and carrying. So there's usually baskets instead of pottery. There's usually minimal weaponry, things that are easy to put together in a hurry, and the weapons are used for hunting. Along about 3000 BC, and some people say 3200 BC, it looks like a satellite hit something in this planet and completely changed the weather patterns and the actual flora and fauna of large regions. So what is now the Sahara Desert used to be the Great Plains of northern Africa, and there were great herds, just as there had been in the Great Plains of the North America. But when this satellite, or when this asteroid hit, it looks as if it caused such a change that people were no longer able to support themselves on those plains. So we have the Central Asia plains, we have the Sahara plains, and we have the area, some of the mountainous areas as well, particularly the Caucasus, begin to be uninhabitable at the level of populations that they had been supporting before. And the people start moving to where water is and where life is, and that is the river valleys. So this is when the Fertile Crescent began to take off. All of us remember the Fertile Crescent from grade school. So the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, and up into Turkey, into the area we call Anatolia now, we get the beginning of a very different thing. We go from the village and movement to settled populations with more and more control. And at that time, we begin to get people taking on emergency leadership roles and controlling populations to deal with emergencies, and then becoming more and more involved in something that we are experiencing today, the accumulation of resources. We have what Daniel Quinn called in his novel Ishmael, the taker culture. We are about taking, we're about hoarding, we're about saving and holding on to things, and about reaching out to get more. And I call this the empire culture. This is the birth of it. The notion that what once was divine for all beings to share now is divine for the king or the emperor to distribute as he chooses and to take more of when he wants becomes the norm in that role. So for about 5,000, maybe 6,000 years, we've been dealing with that. As you can see, it's exceeded its carrying capacity a few times, and it's actually beginning to fail, as we have seen in our culture. Along about 1000 CE, somewhere between 900 and 1100, we had the beginnings of monastery life that was under Saint Benedict's rule. Now, Saint Benedict's rule is very interesting. He introduced this rule in about 1000 CE, the Christian or the Common Era now. And what his rule says is that when you're in the monastery, a number of things happen. First of all, you divide the day into very specific blocks of time. Second of all, those blocks of time are in service and they're in prayer. But there are two other things that I think were very profound. And one of them is that under St. Benedict's rule, when you enter a monastery, whoever you were before you were made into a brother or a sister is behind you and no longer relevant. Now you are just a brother or a sister. So it doesn't matter whether you are a prince or a pauper or anything in between, you are equal with everyone else who has joined this monastery. The other thing that St. Benedict's rule said was, even though the monastery is part of an order, and the order is led by a bishop and an archbishop and a cardinal and ultimately the pope, within the monastery, the leadership, the abbot, is elected by its members. Everybody equal, and we elect our leadership. I think we've heard of this somewhere. So this idea was introduced about that time into a world where everyone else was governed by this divine king, this divine emperor, this divinely appointed person who was in charge and could say whatever he wanted to say. The monasteries were interesting during that period because they were in a very big expansion time. There's a wonderful book called The Medieval Machine that talks about how this worked. And there's one particular group, they were the White Brothers, they wore white robes and white habits, and they would go around and they would go to a new area where there was a king or a baron or someone, and they'd say, "Can you give us about 50 acres of your worst land, please? We would like to set up a little monastery there," and it would be 9 brothers who would go, and yes, of course, you can have that rocky hillside over there. And so they would set up their monastery where there was water. They would either do a well or get a spring or get a creek or something where there was flowing water, and then they would take a few sheep and they'd put them on this land. And the sheep then would produce wool, which then they would shear and they would card and they would spin and they would weave. And as the herds grew, they would involve more and more people from the community. So usually within a decade or so, a monastery of about 9 people would have as many as 3,000 people associated with it, working for them. And the monastery would have been converted to what amounts to a factory, because they would have the shearing station and the carding station and the washing stations and the spinning stations, and they would involve people in doing it. And they used water power for that, and they had clean latrines, and they had all this wonderful stuff. And about 3,000 people watched people who were all equal, all literate, and electing their leadership. And that began to have an impact. And soon we had things like guilds forming, and we had other things happening. So during the period that we've been focusing on the Crusades, all of this was happening in the background and underneath. So somewhere in there we got what I'm calling a technological innovation, the idea of a factory, basically, and these new values regarding human worth and dignity. So these ideas begin to percolate through. The Templars were part of this same rule, and it applied to them as well. And the Templars, the Knights Templar, actually involved 50,000 people between Scotland and the Holy Land. Scotland and Jerusalem. They had lands, they had horses. For every one night in Jerusalem, it took 500 people to be able to support the knight and his horse in Jerusalem. And they had ships to move things around, and they also had great storage towers where they stored the food for themselves and for the horses, and people started using the Knights Templar, and their facilities for all kinds of things. And one of the things they became is a banker, because you could leave some things with the Knights Templar in Scotland, and he would write a letter to the next, any of the other Knights Templars saying, yes, we have here on hold the 100 florins worth of whatever, and so you could take this to the next Knights Templar monastery, land holding, and they would say, and you would say, I need 10 of that. And they would cross off, now you have 90, and they could go on. So people could move across Europe without carrying the cash. And so we get the emergence of banking as well as these more democratic provisions. So these values and these possibilities spread across Europe very quickly. And by 1300, when the knights are officially wiped out, and that's another story I won't go into, which is kind of cool, they've become something that everybody sort of knows about, and those guilds are beginning to grow. And well, the wiping out of the Knights Templar, they only wiped out 297 people. 50,000, 297.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had some left over somewhere. Do you think maybe? So it looks as if there were a lot of underground secret societies, including the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and a whole bunch of other folks. And it looks as if they carried forward these ideas. Fast forward to the 1700s, we have some Freemasons in this new land called North America, who have this notion that when you are a Mason, everyone is equal and you elect your leadership. Isn't that interesting? And everyone is literate, and everyone has a very clear faith in some divine power. It doesn't matter what it is, by the way, if you're a Freemason. So, at that point, we have the founding of the first democratic republic in the 1700s. And by 150 years later, virtually every European country is a democratic republic of some kind. Some of them are still maintaining a monarchy around it. And over the next 100 years, even though the empires have continued to expand into Africa and India and so on, by the mid-1900s, the 1960s, all of those colonies are being turned into some version of a democratic republic. So in the world today, 99% of nations are democratic republics. They're either constitutional monarchies or they are elected leaders. This is amazing. Just amazing. Even though we have some rather autocratic oligarchs out there, by comparison to where we were even 50 years ago, it's just fabulous. And some of that is related to the idea that these principles are the most important things in the world. Well, just as about 1000 CE, there were major technological innovations and changes in values, along about 2000 CE, actually I'm going to say 1965, there were major shifts in technology and in our values. And one of them was the computer. I started key punching right around that time, and I know other people who've been playing with computers as long as that as well. But the other one, I'm going to assign a particular book title, Silent Spring. And then I'm going to say The Tragedy of the Commons. And then I'm going to say Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Kingston Trio, and Pete Seeger and the Weavers. All of those people combined to offer us a whole different understanding of our relationship with the earth, and an ecological value system began to emerge. So we have a new technology and we have a new value system coming in. So I'm rounding it off because all the others are very rounded off on the graph, but from my perspective, 1965 is the launch date for a whole new way of living. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on now. So, what is it? We don't know. But some of those things that are present in this new culture. have to do with the technology explosion. You know, a whole lot of things happened between 1890 and 1940. It was a huge shift. I know I had a great-grandmother who in the 1890s was traveling around the world by steamship as a violinist. And in the 1940s, she was traveling around the world on a DC-8 as a violinist, right? So, yeah, there was a huge amount then, but the difference between 1960 and 2020 is just amazing. The idea, the way we are living now is so far beyond anything else that anyone could imagine. And the mobile population has been part of that mass urbanization. In the 1940s, 10% of America lived in cities. 10% in cities. Right now, worldwide, half the population lives in cities, and over the next couple generations or decades, they're expecting about 2/3 of the world population to be living in the cities. We are the first generation raised on scientific parenting. People have been studying and they've been reading textbooks, and Benjamin Spock told them, wait 4 hours whether the baby's crying or not, and all kinds of things like that. And so there is a whole new way of relating to people as a result of this kind of thing. And it's contributed to this new culture. Reading the next line, called colleges replaced apprenticeships. Okay? After World War II, there was something called the GI Bill. A whole bunch of guys who would never, ever, ever have seen a college in their whole life got to go to college, and they got to be white-collar professionals, which was unheard of in the history of humanity. And so they were insisting that their kids, the baby boomers, all had to go to college so that they could have the benefits of this as well. During that time, apprenticeship programs were practically wiped out. You know, technical schools were wiped out. It was very, very strange or unusual for someone to get through high school and not go on to college. And frankly, not everyone really, really belonged or wanted to be in college, but that was what that generation, our generation, had to go through. In my experience, what it did is dilute college. I'm the 5th generation of college professors in my family. My daughter is now the 6th generation. We have this long tradition and idea of what college is and could be. And by the time I graduated from college, it wasn't that anymore. And so we have an entirely different way of understanding how the world works. What we have, according to the Harvard experiments, is people who've grown up, instead of moving into what Unitarianism stands for, which is a committed relativism. I am committed to my way of thinking, and I am glad you are committed to yours. I'm equally committed to your having your own way of thinking. That is what a 4-year liberal arts degree can provide. But what we've turned out instead is the equivalent of sophomore, wise fool, who are stuck in dualism. Committed dualism. One way is right and the other way is wrong. This has messed us up culturally for quite a while, and we're starting to see the impacts of that all over the world, unfortunately. I'm going to just skip over the others because I've already hinted on them. The music, the arts as helping define the culture, the civil rights movement, and the democratization of all those other countries. The environmental movement, space exploration, the photos of us from a planet. And that reminds me that we're supposed to have a film night on April 3rd. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. Maybe we can video it as well. That is called Planetary. Planetary is a whole thing about people's experiences when they first stepped off the planet and looked back and went, wow, look what we've got, right? And the whole Earth catalog, some of you remember that. And around and between all of that, my field of systems science and cybernetics began to emerge. So I have biology, anthropology, environmental studies, and cybernetics and systems, and for me it's all one thing. And finally, we saw in the 60s the beginning of appreciation for native ways. Up until that point, the whole culture was about wiping out those other cultures. And in the 60s, we got a shift. So, interestingly, in the middle of all of that, the Unitarian Universalist Association was formed. And it was formed based on some Judeo-Christian traditions. Particularly at that time, they were interested in what's called the social gospel. The social gospel was Jesus going around helping the poor, helping the sick, saying that the rich do not have a chance, and so on. It was very different from the kind of gospel that is focusing on salvation. The congregational structure of the UUA grows from the New England congregational churches. All the original Unitarian churches were all from New England, and they had that experience. They elected their leaderships, the members decide the policy. And then finally, this group of people got together and said, we don't want a creed, we want a set of principles. And the 6 UU principles that we all know and love and hold so dear emerged out of that. And if you don't have a copy of it, let us know, because you need to have a copy of the principles, and we will make sure that you do. But you can always go online, do UUA principles, and they will be there. All right? Then, what we ended up with then was a model of the universe in which humanity's worth was at the middle. And so as we look at the core of the UUA, what we're looking at, our principles, human worth and dignity is our essence. We're a humanist organization in that way. And these other things, the democratic process, accepting of each other, the justice and equity and all these things revolved around that. And that was the essence of Unitarian Universalism all through the 60s and 70s, and for many organizations, many congregations, it still is. But in the 80s, something happened, and something began to shift again on the whole world. We began to understand that the world is an ecosystem, and we began to realize that humanity is a unified whole within this ecosystem, this biosphere of Earth. And we began to realize, as the quantum understandings and the cosmological understandings began to come together, and we get books like A Brief History of Time, and all of that good stuff, we began to realize, oh my goodness, the whole universe is one whole. And this is the essence of systems thinking. There is one system. It is the universe. And everything is a subsystem within that, and you can't do any one thing, etc. And finally, we begin to hear in the 1990s at that World Environmental Conference in Brazil, we finally hear from the indigenous people, and we begin to realize, oh my goodness, they have some answers! And things shifted in the 80s and 90s. And so the principles got changed. And we added the 7th principle, the one that says we are part of the interconnected web of life. And we're going to affirm and promote that there is an interconnected web and we are part of it. So now we have a shift from humanity and its worth being the core to this realization that we're all part of this interconnected web. And now we don't just honor human beings, we honor all beings. And now we don't just seek to have justice and truth and meaning in our own personal lives. We realize that there needs to be a broader understanding of that. And so what I am going to suggest is that the Unitarian Universalist Association has been living and explicating is the word I'm looking for, explicating, saying explicitly the principles of this emerging culture. And so now we have this new model in which we are one people, one planet, in some kind of creative process that is constantly shifting and changing. And at the bottom, all within an eternal field of intelligence, and many of us that consider that intelligence to be loving, in which these principles then guide our behavior. So this is the basis for this new world that is forming in and around it, between all these other forms of culture, as they fall away, as they are no longer effective. Meanwhile, those hunting, gathering, and small villages are still doing just fine. Often they're corners of the country, of the world. But our new global culture is emerging. And it's likely to be drawing heavily on those villages and hunting, gathering groups. So this culture that we're talking about is, as I say, explicated by our UUA principles. And it involves, making the shift involves a set of actions at all of these 5 areas. Fundamentally, our assumptions are based on ecosystems. We recognize the body is an ecosystem. The household is an ecosystem. If we can begin to think of it in that way, we'll start being able to produce more of what we use in the household. The community is an ecosystem. If we recognize that, we'll start dealing with water and soil and air in some new ways. And as we start seeing things in those ways, the continent is an ecosystem. There are bioregions within the continent. The ocean is an ecosystem. It has needs, etc. We start recognizing that, then we stop exploiting the resources nearly as much, right? And we have new kinds of technologies that recognize that if the household is healthy and the community is healthy, then the world is healthy. We come up with social structures that support the development of the individual because of those principles and because of that understanding. And our economics then shift because it becomes about producing and distributing the goods that support the development and the sustainability of households and communities. And finally, we are making decisions in small groups because we are focused on making it work for everybody. If you want to know where and how this is happening, go online, put in sustainable organizations. You'll see thousands of entries all over the world. Or you can do empowerment of women. Worldwide, women are taking leadership. And the Dalai Lama says that the salvation of the world will be Western-educated women. I'm really curious to see how that's going to look. Communities are transforming themselves worldwide into more sustainable systems, and we're seeing more and more movements that are based on these principles that the UUA has been teaching and developing. We're seeing, because of our social justice and the social justice activities all over the world, great reductions in poverty. I can show you the graphs. We're basically at 1% of the poverty levels worldwide that we ever have been in the history, the written history of humanity. If you want to find more interesting information, go to TED Talks, TED.com, all kinds of guidance there. And finally, we can see this in the transmigration across all kinds of boundaries, not just the national boundaries, but we have cultural boundaries where things are shifting. I am suggesting that a new culture is emerging, that the UUA is a huge part of it, and it is the only part of it that is actually explicitly stated the principles that are the guiding principles for this culture. When we get through this time, and we are going to be getting through this time, we will be a different people. As soon as people get off the wheel, and they are now off the wheel, wow, they're going to start seeing things differently. They're going to feel differently. They are not going to return in the same way that they left our corporate capitalist driving culture. The empire may well have just died, and it may be COVID-19 that did it. I bless you all, and I thank you all so much for being you and helping create this new world culture. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, very nice. Okay. That out of your way.
I love how you weave that back into the 7 principles and where we're going, where we are, how we're going to get there, and there is hope.
Yes.
Thank you, Ruth. So appreciate it. So as we draw to an end of this service, please keep in mind how much this fellowship has meant to you, to those who've come before you, and to those in the future that we may never know. We are a place where people gather, in person or virtually, to nurture our spirits and put our faith into action. We hope you enjoyed today's message, our music, and that you feel our virtual hugs. As best you are able, we will appreciate your donations and continued pledge support. You can do this by clicking on the donate button on our website, www.florenceUUF.com, or sending a check to P.O. Box 2502, Florence 97439. Additionally, please remember our friends at Florence Food Share. They are the offertory, the community partner that we have selected for these 2 months, hoping to raise money, hoping to raise food items for them so they can help those people in our community who are less fortunate than you or us. You can drop off your food items from your pantry. Now's a good time to clean out your pantry. Those items that you're not going to be needing, someone else will certainly be blessed by that. Or you can drop off a cash donation to Food Share. Thank you for that. So as we begin these offerings in person and virtually, I ask you to repeat after me. Divine love through me.
Divine love through me.
Blesses and multiplies all that I am.
Blesses and multiplies all that I am.
All that I give.
All that I give.
And all that I receive.
And all that I receive.
I am prosperous now.
I am prosperous now.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
For the gifts we do receive, we will be truly grateful. So before our service draws to an end with extinguishing our chalice, and as Catherine makes her way to the front, I offer thanks to everyone who volunteered to make this service today happen for all of us. Catherine, we've got Darlene, Reverend Ruth, and Jeff Lovejoy for his beautiful music. So this comes from someone named Becky Laurent. As flame is to spirit, so spirit is to breath, and breath to song. Though we extinguish the flame in this sanctuary, may we tend it in our collective hearts until we meet again. So with Jeff's fine help on the piano, we are going to gather back up front. We're going to sing our peace song to conclude our service today, March 22nd, and we wish you well. So Jeff, shall we do a rousing peace song? Take care, everyone. We hope to see you very soon in person, if not virtually, again next Sunday. Check your emails. We do have an e-blast coming out this afternoon. No, probably Wednesday. But keep your eyes peeled, because we may be sending out more communication to keep you informed. And if you have a great day, we really appreciate your being here. Thank you.